Hello, welcome back to my channel. If you're new around here, my name's Kit and I like to read books. That sounded a little bit like an AA meeting, didn't it? Hello everybody. I'm ashamed to admit I'm a booktuber. It's been approximately 48 hours since I last read something. Shall we get cracking? This is going to be a hopefully brief and light-hearted exploration of 3 different authors who each included significant time jumps in their books, and how the methods used by these authors differed and caused me to DNF 2 of their books and become a lifelong fan of the 3rd author. Reading Rutherfurd feels like I'm reading a checklist. He is clearly a very gifted historian and researcher, and he's very genuinely interested in his subject. He's trying to cover literally thousands of years of the history of whichever particular city he happens to be writing about. So he's writing about Sarum, which is more commonly known as Salisbury. And so he has, I imagine, some sort of checklist where important points in the history of the city need to be covered. Salisbury, for example, there's a crucial part of the history, which is the construction of Stonehenge. You can't write a history of Salisbury and not include the construction of Stonehenge. So that's a checklist item. And there are many, many items, obviously, throughout the thousands of years of history that need to be ticked off the list. And that's what it feels like when you're reading the book. It feels like he had a historical checklist and then he dreamt up some rudimentary story ideas and characters and narrative to shoehorn into the history to make it a novel rather than a history book, because he states very clearly that what he's writing is a novel, not a history book. But it seems to me that the structure of Rutherfurd's books is based on a historical checklist and then shoehorning those historical events into a thrown together narrative which has minimal story, because you can't have an ongoing story if you're going to be covering thousands of years of history, because it would be a ridiculously big book. It would be impossible. So all you can do is have a little bit of story set in a particular era and then jump forward 3,000 or 4,000 years and then start a whole other story set in that era with a completely new set of characters and a new narrative, etc., etc. So there's nothing that the reader can sink their teeth into, because just as you're starting to get invested in the story and the characters, you jump forward 3,000 years and they've all died and you're starting a new story with different characters. I want to become emotionally invested in the characters. I want to care about them. I want to love the good guys and I want to hate the bad guys. And I want to care about the story that they're living, that they're experiencing. I want to care about the outcome. It matters. Otherwise, what's the point in reading it? But if it was just that there were massive time jumps and insufficient story and insufficient character depth, that might not have caused me to DNF. What finally sealed the fate of Edward Rutherfurd for me was the fact that I felt insulted as a reader. I felt that my intelligence was being insulted. The way he did it was by throwing in little linking features that were supposed to fool me into thinking that I was reading an ongoing narrative. To be honest, it made me want to throw the book across the room. I didn't, because I might have hit my cat, but I was irritated by things like a character is given unusually long toes. There's no other reason that the length of his toes doesn't enter into the story, or it's not relevant in any way, shape or form. But what it means is that when you jump forward 3,000 years and there's a character who suddenly is described as having unusually long toes, you can go, oh, he's descended from that guy. Having unusually long toes does not an interesting character make. I have a head that resembles a potato. Somewhere in the dim and distant past, there was probably a caveman who had a head that was shaped like a potato. That doesn't mean I'm interested in reading his life story. So, Rutherfurd's books have three major issues. They feel like a checklist, the characters and story are not properly developed, and there are annoying linking features used to make you think that you're reading an ongoing narrative when actually you're not. But the final thing, the final nail in the coffin, is the fact that although Rutherfurd's prose is actually quite good, right in the middle of a scene involving characters and events and story and stuff that I'm desperately trying to cling on to because I want to keep reading, suddenly he lurches out of that scene, breaking the fourth wall in the process, and stops being a storyteller and starts being a history professor. And it's kind of like Ugg Thunderjock stared up into the branches of the tree and spotted a bird's nest and thought to himself, is it worth taking the risk to climb these treacherous branches and investigate the nest in the hope that there might be an edible egg inside? Scientists have recently discovered from the fossil record and by the use of carbon dating that coniferous trees that evolved in Britain during the late Cretaceous period did not in fact have baubles. So to sum up, Sarum by Edward Rutherfurd, in my personal opinion, lurches clumsily and carelessly from one time period to the next, with minimal character development and minimal narrative. And what narrative there is stitched clumsily together by the use of very obvious narrative devices, which are insulting to the reader's intelligence. And in addition to all of that, the writer lurches clumsily in and out of two different voices, the storyteller voice and the dusty old history professor voice. And in my personal opinion, the two styles do not go very well together. The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch. I know, everybody loves this. It's considered a modern classic. It's considered one of the most perfect fantasy books ever written. Yada, yada, yada. I really wanted to love this book, and there was no reason at all why I shouldn't love this book. I love books and stories in general that involve people learning skills, particularly if those skills happen to involve things like being a spy, or being an assassin, or being a thief, or taking on other personas. I loved that aspect of the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. That was the main thing that kept me reading when the rest of the book seemed to be kind of depressing. A major reason for me loving the Robin Hobb books so much is because of all the stuff that involves training the boy to be an assassin and teaching him how to wear disguises and how to mix his various potions. And there are secret passages. I love secret passages. I love it when a section of wall slides away and there's a staircase that leads to somewhere. I love all of that stuff. I like spycraft. I like thieves. I like assassins. I like all of that secret stuff, disguises and secret passages. It's great. So The Lies of Locke Lamora couldn't have been more written for my personal tastes. And in addition to all of that, I really liked the setting. I liked the fact that it was not a Middle-earth type setting, but it was a city, and it was a city from a very specific time and place that I've not read before, but I found intriguing and engrossing, and there was nothing in that book that should have turned me off, and yet it's a possible DNF. I'm not going to say definitively yet because I really want to finish it, and I have heard that the books get better as well. However, there are two major stumbling blocks so far. One of them isn't quite so bad, and that's the fact that I'm not overly impressed with Scott Lynch's prose. I think the writing is quite clumsy, and there are some turns of phrase that have made me wince and feel a little bit uncomfortable. Every time there's a bit of dodgy prose, it takes me out of the narrative. It breaks my immersion and makes me start analysing the writing. I get distracted very easily by that sort of thing. And That's okay, I'm used to it. I'm a fan of Raymond E. Feist, someone who has written some of the worst prose I've ever read, but I love his storytelling. His stories grip me and hold on to me. Even when he's not writing particularly well, I'm still captivated by the story. And when he's writing with the assistance of Janny Wirtz, it's a sublime experience to read. I noticed almost immediately that Lynch doesn't write particularly well. However, I was quite prepared to forgive that because I really wanted to invest in a story about someone becoming a master thief and a master con man, using disguises, taking on different personas, playing different characters, masquerading as an aristocrat. I love all of this stuff so much. And yet, every time I started to get really gripped by the story and I was getting sucked in and I wanted to find out what happened next, it would lurch clumsily into another flashback. And these flashbacks aren't particularly gripping or entertaining or even necessarily rewarding. I understand why the flashbacks are there. They're giving us the character's backstory. They're explaining to us who Locke Lamora is and how he became who he is. But the flashbacks aren't sufficiently interesting, entertaining, or rewarding to justify tearing me away from the story that I was actually quite enjoying. It feels a little bit rude. Hang on a minute, I was enjoying that. I want to find out what happens next. Oh no, now I've got to spend 50 pages reading about this kid and how he became basically the Artful Dodger. If I want to read about the Artful Dodger, I'll pick up Charles Dickens, thank you very much, because frankly the backstory for Locke Lamora is kind of derivative. It feels very much like I'm reading Dickens, but not written so well. So stick to the main story if you please. And finally, the series of books with probably more time jumps than any other series of books that has ever been written ever, because that's the main story element of the books, is the fact that they leap backwards and forwards in time. And it is, of course, and I'm sorry if I'm becoming a crashing bore, but it is, of course, the Deverry series by Katharine Kerr, a set of books that are staggeringly underrepresented in the BookTube community. And that's why I'm still banging on about them, because I want to champion these books and I want to champion Katharine Kerr as a writer. These books are, in my opinion, the best fantasy books ever written. I think they're better than Jordan. Again, it's just my personal opinion, so please don't hate me for it. I just really love these books. And yet they jump all over the place in time. So why did these books not irritate me the way the other two books irritated me? Well, the simple explanation is that it's not flashbacks. In Katharine Kerr, when you jump into another time period and they go backwards and forwards in time, it's not flashbacks or flash forwards, it's just different sections of one big story, and it's being told in a non-linear way, so you're jumping in and out of different time periods with different characters. However, it's all one story. It doesn't feel as if you're being torn away from the story that you were reading and having to start a different story. It just feels as if the camera angle is changing and you're viewing the story from a different perspective. And although the characters are different, they are essentially the same characters because they are different incarnations of the same soul. So unlike the Rutherfurd method, whereby he gives a character elongated toes and then 3,000 years later a descendant of that character also has elongated toes, and that's supposed to tie the two things together and make it feel fulfilling for a reader. What Kerr does is actually much deeper and more important. The characters are fully fleshed out, three-dimensional beings, and quite often you get to visit the characters and stay with them throughout the majority of their life, all in one section before it jumps time periods again. So you're invested in the character, you know the character intimately, and the length of their toes is not relevant. What's relevant is what's going on in their heart and in their mind and in their soul. And when that character dies and gets reborn several times over, and you visit them in a different incarnation, the important parts of that previous character are there only in the sense of their psychic scars, their psychic wounds. So when they get reincarnated hundreds of years later, they don't have the same physical characteristics. The two characters aren't linked because of long toes or funny hair. They're linked because they react and respond to certain things in a way that has been informed by or moulded by events that happened in previous lives. And they're unaware of it. The characters in Kerr's books do not remember their previous lives. They don't even know that they had previous lives. But as a reader, you can apply certain knowledge of their previous lives to events that are taking place in their present lives. You can look at what a character does and see how that decision was informed by something that happened to them in a previous life. But when we see those events in the dim and distant past, we're not seeing them in a flashback, because that is just as important. The events that happened hundreds of years ago are just as important as the events that are happening in the quote-unquote present, and they're just as important as the events that are going to be happening in the future that we haven't yet got to. So it never feels as if you're being dragged away from something that you were really enjoying and forced to read a few pages of a flashback and then jumping back again, which is what Scott Lynch does. And it doesn't feel as if you're investing in characters and then suddenly it's 3,000 years later and they're dead and you're never going to see them again, like what happens with the Sarum book. With Sarum, if you become invested in the characters, when it jumps 3,000 years into the future, you never see those characters again. Whereas in these books, in the Katharine Kerr books, you become invested in the characters and it may cut away from them to scenes in the future after those characters have died, but you don't need to mourn their loss because you're going to be seeing them again. It jumps back again. The books jump backwards and forwards in and out of all the different time periods. So when a character dies, you don't grieve too badly because you know that you're going to see them again the next time you revisit a time period where they happened to be alive, which is very satisfying. And similarly, you don't feel that you're investing in a character that is then a wasted investment because it turned out to only be a few pages, because it may have only been a few pages, but you will be coming back to them and you'll be getting more of their story. So in conclusion, in the battle of the flashbacks, I would have to say that Katharine Kerr is the clear winner and will always be the winner, because I don't think anyone will ever be able to come along and do a better job of bringing the reader in and out of different time periods and different characters. I can't imagine any writer ever being able to weave such a complex tapestry of different threads of character, narrative, time period into a world so complex and detailed and vivid as what Katharine Kerr achieved with her books and continues to achieve. Rant over. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, you know what to do. Please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, and I will see you next time. See you later.